we are nowhere close. We aren't even on the same outer rim of a galaxy. It is crazy how far we are from self-serve data analytics. We are in the age of unstructured data and people are not using it enough. Curiosity is one of the most valuable assets as a data person you can possibly have. Curiosity means that when they are conflicted about your results, you are curious as to why.
You're listening to Data Renegades, a regular series where we discuss data, code, culture, and everything in between. We interview pioneers of tools and concepts we now use every day in the data world. These ideas often started as experimental projects or unconventional approaches. The builders are renegades who are inspiring and shaping the industry. Data Renegades is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor in enterprise infrastructure. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you would like to suggest a topic, find us on datarenegades.com.
Hi, I'm Dori Wilson, and welcome to another episode of Data Renegades.
And I'm CL, CEO of Recce and your host of Data Renegades. Today, our guest is Bryan Bischof, currently head of AI and Theory Venture, who has been at the forefront of building products and teams, leveraging first, machine learning and now AI. Bryan's career spans building the world's first recommendation system for coffee at Blue Bottles and leading the deep ML work at Stitch Fix, building data teams at Weights and Biases, and most recently leading AI at Hacks, where, he shipped Magic, their AI feature suite. He holds a PhD in pure mathematics, co-authored O'Reilly books on recommendation systems, and teaches data science at Rutgers University. Oh, and in his spare time, he walks every single street in Berkeley where I live. Hello, welcome to the podcast, Bryan.
Hey, thanks for having me, CL and Dori. Great to be here.
Yeah, we're such a big fan of you.
Yeah, they're super excited that you are here with us.
Can you take us back to the beginning? What problem kind of first pulled you into the data space?
Yeah, so I was in graduate school and I was doing a math PhD at the time, and I was planning on staying in academia as a mathematician. And some things were about to happen in my life that were kind of a little bit of a distraction. But before that, I had met this researcher who had also been pure mathematician in algebraic geometry. And his name is Chris Hiller. And he was doing this really interesting work where he was using machine learning and mathematics, geometry, to think about neuroscience. And so he was doing this really interesting work in neuroscience, and he was kind of at the intersection of machine learning and industry. And I talked to him, and he had all these interesting stories about problems he was working on. And I was like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. And then a short bit time later, I met another algebraic geometer who had gone into industry named Kevin Lin. And Kevin Lin also had all these interesting things to say about data. And I was like, I didn't think there were any interesting problems in industry, but maybe there are some interesting problems in industry. And so that kind of got me thinking maybe there's something there. And then I ended up applying to work at a startup after sort of deciding that I wasn't going to stay in academia. And I ended up working in time series data. And so my first foray into data science, I was the first data engineer at the startup, which was acquired by IBM shortly thereafter, where I was building data transformations on streaming data. And so at the time, I had no idea about any of this stuff, but they basically said, okay, we've got this streaming data, their time series. How can you kind of help us make decisions on this time series data in real time? And I was like, oh, okay, this seems like a very reasonable thing. Hindsight, we're talking streaming data, their time series, and inference needs to be real time as well. So I was trying to do inference on real time streaming stuff. And then the thing that I haven't even told you is the scale of the data. The scale of the data was also terabyte scale. And about 12 years ago, terabyte scale streaming data was a real pain in the ass. And so, again, I'm completely ignorant. And I'm just okie dokie, this sounds fun. And so I still remember Spark streaming came out when I was about 6 months into this job. And I was like, this seems relevant. I wonder if anyone else is using Spark for anything. And so, that's when I started learning Spark. So that was my very first exposure to the data world.
Wow.
And what language were you coding in?
Yeah. Want to guess?
R.
Nope. Scala.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was actually just about to ask, because coming from math, what sort of like functional programming thinking you was that like would be naturally to apply to all those kind of interesting industry problems? There we are.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at the time, like Spark streaming did exist in Python and it like kind of existed in R. But Scala was the one that people would talk about as like, oh, it's really good if you do it in Scala. And so I started learning a little bit of Scala and I was like, oh, this like makes like total sense. Like, this is great. The type system was really great. It just like felt really easy to think of like, you got this RDD, like, how we're going to chunk it up into these pieces, operate on this RDD. It all just made sense with my math brain. And so to your point, like CL, I do tend to like functional languages. They've obviously lost a little bit of steam lately, but I still do find them very natural. And I've learned a little bit of Haskell. I've learned, obviously, Scala. There was a short bit of time where I forget what it's called, but there was this like ML library that was the functional. It was like F or something like that. And I started learning a little bit of that because I was like, oh, like PyTorch isn't functional enough. Actually, when people ask me my favorite like machine learning or neural nets like framework, I always tell them JAX. And the reason that I like JAX so much is because it's not really a functional language, but sure as hell feels like a functional language. When you write JAX, it just like somehow just like fits right into my like weird shaped brain. And I don't know, it makes a lot more sense to me than like trying to write things in like
imperative ones.
Yeah, exactly. It's why I've never found Keras very useful, or even like TensorFlow is a little bit annoying. I just found them to be like too imperative.
And then, so you got into data in the startup acquired by IBM, and then like got into data. And then what happened next?
Yeah, I mean, so I built a lot of algorithms for taking this like high-speed streaming data and downsampling it, and then doing inference. And then it was kind of time to move on. The IBM like Borg process had taken place, and the work had become useless.
Not mysterious enough.
Yeah, my time ended up just like the value of my time was rapidly approaching zero. And so I started looking around, and of all things, at the time I was like, I'll look on Craigslist. I was like, I'll see if there's any jobs on Craigslist, this is like a totally true story, but it's insane. I had applied to some other jobs through normal channels, but I had seen there was a job on Craigslist at Blue Bottle Coffee. And I was like, no way. It's like, I'm like obsessed with coffee. Like I was already really, really into coffee. And the job wasn't even like software engineer. It was data software engineer. And I was like, this is like exactly the kind of thing that I'm doing. Like I'm technically a software engineer at this startup acquired by IBM, but I focus on data engineering and data science work. And I had written some like papers on like probability and stuff as well. And so I was like, man, this seems like too good to be true. So I apply, I interview, and like, sure enough, it is like basically just like come build a data practice. And so like I built the data warehouse. I stood up all the sort of like stuff around the data warehouse. And I remember during the interview process, especially like close to the offer, they're like, if you can automate our P&L, like hiring you will be a success. We think it'll take like a year. We respect that it'll take time. But basically, if you just like automate our P&L, like we will be successful in hiring you. That's like your success criteria. And I'm like, okay. And so it only took me about a month. And it was a hellish month. One of the like grindiest months of my career, because I was like trying to read all this information from NetSuite. And luckily I had this really amazing colleague, Greg, and this other colleague, Dave, and they worked on things kind of like on the more like back end of the system side. And like together we were able to build out this like data warehouse, and I was able to automate the P&L, and that was the beginning. And so from there it became like, how do we optimize everything? How do we think about optimizing the cafes? That led to me building a forecasting engine. So coming from a time series background, I was interested in forecasting, but I had never worked on time series forecasting proper. And so I like bought Hinman's book and read the entire book and was like, okay. And I still have my copy of like all the notes and the margins and everything. I like read the entire book, unfortunately in R. And I was like, okie dokie, time to just apply this. And so this was how I got into time series forecasting. And we were forecasting everything from like number of scones in the Rockefeller Cafe to like where should we put the next cafe in downtown SF.
Mm-hmm.
We did a pricing experiment, which was really interesting. We did like availability experiment. One of my friends, Sean Taylor, who's this really great data scientist, he works at OpenAI now. He and I have talked about this experiment, and it's one that he's been really excited about because it's like I had to do a physical experiment. Like I had to do something in cafes to run this like A/B test. And so it was really fun to try to figure out like how the hell are we going to do an availability experiment with items at a cafe? I can't simply allocate people at the door of like, no, you get a scone and you don't. Sorry. And so like it was a lot of fun trying to like brainstorm like how do you solve all these problems? And one of the problems was this recommendation system for coffee. It was basically just like we had this like subscription program, and people wanted to get the coffee that they wanted. How on earth are you going to like get them a good coffee? And we had a pretty high level of churn, I would say, in terms of like they order their first coffee and then they do not stay subscribed. And one of the questions is like, can we reduce churn? And so we ran this really fun survey, which was like, we sent a survey to hundreds of subscribers about like a bunch of questions. And we took those answers to those questions, which are not necessarily about coffee. And we looked at like, okay, what coffee do they mostly order? And that was our training data for my random forest. And that was actually my first recommender. And so, yeah, that was super fun.
Oh, that's cool. What did you find as the, biggest predictive feature?
Yeah, your favorite salad dressing.
Seriously?
Really?
Yeah. Okay, so at the time, I was working with the coffee team, right? So like Blue Bottle had this amazing coffee team, like a lot of people that are like top 100 coffee professionals in the world, all like a surprising number of them all at Blue Bottle at the same time. Really like kind of like the salad days of this kind of tech plus coffee. No pun intended on salad dressing and salad days. But at the time I was like, and I had this idea, like I want to build this coffee recommender. This I'm going to do it. I have all these great ideas. And I remember like checking with the coffee team. This was not like, oh, I'm going to like work with the coffee team on this. I was just like, I should just check with them. And I remember checking with them and instantly they were like, no. Like the way that you're approaching this is like completely wrong. And I just remember like two people in particular, like Judith and Carly, they worked with me a lot on like crafting questions. Everyone would be able to answer, but would have really high likelihood of predicting what kind of coffee people wanted. And so I just remember it's like really clear in my mind of Judith being like, so if you're a barista, you're really good at this game. You're really good at like someone comes into the cafe and they say like, I want to buy coffee. And you ask them some questions. And she's like, these are some of the questions you would ask in the cafe. But there's these other questions, which we think are actually really interesting and useful that we don't normally ask in the cafe that we should.
Mm-hmm.
And so Judith and Carly really helped me kind of craft a reasonable survey, which seemed insane to me. And I was like, this seems completely like unpredictable, but it was surprisingly predictive. And so that was the first coffee predictor.
Oh, that's really cool. Also, I love that you took kind of the qualitative knowledge that the coffee team had and made like your data set like, stronger, more enriched. That's really cool.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it was one of those moments where I was like going to Blue Bottle and like, I'm really into coffee. And then it was like, yeah, I realized that I was not as into coffee as I thought I was. And so I'm only more into coffee now, but like it was a lot of learning and a lot of opportunity to kind of like work with actual professionals. And so that was great.
Yeah. I'm thinking, have you heard of a company called Trade Coffee?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember when they first came out, I was like, hey, I've built this before. At one point, me and a friend who's also a Blue Bottle alumni, he and I were kicking around the idea of something very similar to Trade. It was like right around when they came out, but I think Trade's interesting from the perspective of like...
Wait, real quick, for the listeners, Trade Coffee is a subscription coffee service where they ask you questions and then tailor the types of coffee you want and send you coffee beans.
Exactly.
All right, keep going.
Yeah, just coffee shops are famously low margin and coffee subscriptions are also famously low margin. And so there is some reasons to not like deeply invest in this area, but it's one of my like retirement goals is to start a coffee club. Yeah.
No, it's cool. I was just thinking about when you were saying like salad dressing. I was like, Trey didn't ask me that question. It didn't ask me like some off the wall stuff.
Yeah, they need better data scientists.
So like you build this recommendation system and then it's like combining this kind of like unintuitive input, right, from the team, and it has to impact real world customer, right? So I'm curious, like in your career, like what's the most painful bug or failure you've seen in production?
So later on, I went to Stitch Fix, which is a clothing company. they send you a box of clothes and you pick some of those clothes that you keep and you send the rest back. And it's a really great mechanism for people that are not like super excited to go and like go to stores and shop themselves, or they want to just discover things that they maybe like wouldn't be inspired to on their own. So Stitch Fix had a really great algorithm scene. That's what we call the data scientists. And I worked on a bunch of different projects there. One of the things I worked on at Stitch Fix was sort of a like clueless closet type thing. So you talk about your closet and you talk about like clothing you own, and you can pin stuff and you can sort of say like, oh, these are some things I found on the internet, some images, and then we can recommend things that are in our inventory that might be kind of like appropriate for you. You may have seen this like steal this look meme. I remember one of them that was really popular for a while was like the Bernie Sanders one. It was like Bernie Sanders sitting with the like, like with his hands crossed, and it says like steal his look. And on the side, it shows like you can get his jacket here and his, pants here and his like, beanie here. But some of them are more ridiculous. Like there's ones where it's like, it shows like a bird and it says like steal its look. And it like tries to show you all the clothes that would like make you look most like this bird. Well, anyway, we built Steal This Look way back in like 2020, and it worked. It was basically like you would upload a photo and we would tell you all the pieces of clothing in that photo that were most similar to things that we had in our inventory, in your size, and appropriate for your style. Because if you remember, Stitch Fix was really good at latent modeling of like what people liked. That was actually one of the reasons our recognition systems were so powerful, because we had built a lot of things around latent style over the years. So I use these tools to build Steal That Look, and with one of my colleagues, Ian. And so what was interesting was like all the metrics were quite good. And like we were, the offline metrics before launch were inspiring, we'll say. And then we launched it and it was interesting. We definitely like had decent results, but we almost immediately identified that there was a problem. And the PM that was working with us at the time, Lila, she was like, why does this recommend so many backpacks? I'm like, what are you talking about? And so she like pulls up hers, and sure enough, it's like backpack. Next picture, backpack. Next picture, backpack. There's no backpacks in the picture. And I'm like, the hell is going on? I'm like, why is there so many backpacks? That was already like a little bit of a red flag, because there's a backpack in like every recommendation. What was weirder was like in some, there were multiple backpacks. And I'm like, I don't think this is even possible. I'm like, I designed the like diversity metric. Like I know that there's like two kinds of diversity that are programmed into this recommender. There's like soft diversity, or basically based on like mutual distance in the latent space. And then there's a hard diversity, which says you can't recommend two items from the same category. Category is like a special field that we had.
Mm-hmm.
How is this possible? I'm like genuinely baffled that it's giving two like backpacks and everything weird. Two backpacks in the same one, something is wrong. I shit you not. I found one where it gave three backpacks. And I'm like, I'm like trying to create memes to share in the internal channel of me wearing three backpacks. Like, I'm like, this is bizarre. So, man, this was like at least a day of just like staring very, very hard at all the systems and be like, I don't know how this is possible.
Mm-hmm.
Any guesses as to what was wrong before I tell you the answer?
Was the backpack data itself marked wrong?
Kind of. So backpacks were one of the very rare things that were allowed to have multiple categories associated to them. Why? Unclear. But it was one of the very few pieces of garment that we would assign to multiple categories. So one, backpacks got multiple shots on goal. Okay. Two, and this is the thing that was even more annoying. We're doing all this in like a latent space for recommendations, right? We're trying to learn in a non-explainable way what is going to be a good recommendation. We're going to minimize some distance in this high dimensional space. Well, as you probably know, high dimensional space can be a little bit odd. And so like some of the like high dimensional geometry means that things that should be close aren't as close as you like. And things that aren't that close can be shockingly close. We weren't using like cosine distance. There were some reasons why we weren't using cosine distance. We were using more of like a, if I remember correctly, like an L2 norm for this. And there was some like specific reasons, not for everything, but for one part of this recommender, we were using an L2 norm. Well, it just so happens that like, even though you expect most things to be on a shell, and so like L2 distance in most cases is like kind of close enough to, if the radius is big enough, it's kind of close enough to cosine distance. And so who cares? Everything is happening on the shell in high dimensions. Everything's on the shell anyway. You know what's not on the shell? Backpacks aren't on the shell. Backpacks are in some weird part of the latent space where nothing else is except for backpacks. And that part of the latent space is basically close to everything.
Wow.
Is it because the categories? That's fascinating.
And so it had two problems. One, it was because it was in like this like multi-category thing, and because in the latent space, it was just close to everything. And so like, I'm like trying to figure out how this is possible. One, why is it so highly recommended? And two, why is it even giving you multiple responses? And so long story short, I hadn't looked carefully enough at every single type of data and what it could be in. Like, there were only like 2 or 3 items that could even be in multiple categories. And I certainly didn't expect any of the items to be close to everything. But what's interesting about this is like, since then, I've seen 3 or 4 examples of stuff that is close to everything by being so weird, by being so kind of like out of distribution. You think of like out of distribution as everything's over here and it's over here. One of the things I started to learn about like high dimensional latent spaces is that out of distribution sometimes mean weirdly close to everything. And one of the ways that this has bitten me more than anything is not even that it's close to everything, but it's close to the null vector.
Wow.
Things that are close to the null vector has now bitten me twice since then. Recently, I was working on this project called semantic.art. And to be very blunt, we had this situation where more often than I was very happy about, we would get NSFW content. And I'm like, why is this NSFW content? And it's not even like a bunch of random NSFW content. It's the same NSFW content. It's the same creepy photos that are like, and for those of you that don't know, semantic.art is a search engine that I built with Ayush and Chung from Lance TV to search across like a bunch of different art. And you can kind of put in anything you want. You can put in crazy shit and it'll still find good results. Well, with an asterisk. And what was weird is like, there's not a lot of NSFW content in this like data set. What's in there? Well, there's like some like slightly creepy photographs that an artist took of like some naked people. And there's like this other one that's like a painting of like some naked people. And like some of them are like more and less creepy. And I don't have to get into all the details, but like there's like this like set of maybe 50 images. And I'm like, why is this coming up so often? And finally, Ayush actually found the answer, which is like, sometimes we were erroring and that was returning the null vector. And all this NSFW content, by being way out of distribution, was actually close to the null vector. And so like, as much as I wish I could say like, oh, I had the backpacks bug and I never again was like hoisted on this petard. Wrong. Actually, it's like multiple times since. It's been a recurring nightmare. So anyway, so that's my worst bug in production. Too many backpacks. I do have too many backpacks in my life as well, but that's an unrelated bug. My wife is very annoyed by that.
This is fascinating. And then does it have something to do with you like moving a little bit upstream in the tool channels? Like, hey, this is really hard to catch. Can we do better like experiment tracking? And then like, why is this was I doing that?
Very astute observation. I was using weights and biases during that project, and I did see like an early demo of a product from weights and biases called tables. And tables, okay, try to like imagine a world where you have a spreadsheet. And in some of the cells of that spreadsheet, you have pictures.
Yep.
Crazy idea. At the time, this didn't exist. And it was even more difficult to do anything related to like multimodal stuff and kind of like be able to work with like your different experiments. Experiment tracking for this project was like not trivial. And so believe it or not, yeah, I was a user of weights and biases. And that was very much like how I got connected with them and got excited about that product. And much to your kind of allusion there, I basically joined W&B because I was like a fan of the product. I interviewed there to come and like basically be like an MLE because I was like, oh, I think I could build a lot of stuff on top of weights and biases as like an MLE. And after chatting, I was like, actually, the most valuable thing that they need right now is a head of data. And so I joined as sort of the first head of data and hired 3 teams to basically like build out the internal data product.
What made you realize that they needed a head of data and not just another powerhouse IC?
I think when I asked them some basic questions about things in the business, there seemed to be a gap there. And I don't want to take credit for being like the person who noticed this. The COO at the time, he very much was like, I don't want to say telling me, but kind of giving me a hint that like there was some opportunity for more like internal data science and data analytics. And that led to us just like talking about it openly. And so I think he saw pretty clearly that on the operational side, there was opportunity, and he was totally right. They had a consultant at the time and like the data engineering side, just doing some like structural data work. And that was a nice way to bootstrap my organization, but there was a lot of work to do.
Yeah. What was the first few hires that you knew you needed once you were head of data?
Yeah. The first 2 hires that I made, or maybe it was even 3, it was basically focused on like, I knew I needed a data engineer, like a full-time data engineer. And I knew I needed like a full-time data scientist who was going to be focused on like analytics. And so those are some of the early hires. I think if I remember correctly, I hired 1 data analyst, 1 data engineer, and 1 ML like person. And they were there for a while. And I think 2 of them are still there actually. And so like, yeah, I think it was really, really critical to kind of get those key hires in place. Like we had a lot of basic work to do, everything from are people using the product to like, do we have any deals in pipeline? Like there was a 6-month period where all of my team was focused on getting Salesforce data into the data warehouse. And I wish I could say like it was a very unique problem, but from every data leader I've ever spoken to, this is one of the core problems, which is surprisingly, like you would think that this would be like fresh information or stale, but actually Salesforce like continues to lock down their data more and more and make it harder and harder to like use with anything else. And so, yeah, it's surprisingly pertinent to our everyday reality these days.
Yeah, no, it's so difficult. I've had to deal with Salesforce data and then trying to pipe data back into it is a nightmare. I mean, it's just awful. And maybe, you saw this some at Hex because I've seen Hex kind of going more and more into the go-to-market side. And it's like, yes, it's just much easier for me to pull these salespeople, the customer success people to me in this wrapper on a Jupyter notebook that they can just use.
Yeah,
Than to try and keep piping in and out of Salesforce
totally.
constantly.
Yeah, I mean, from my seat, I see so much value in like being able to get your hands on this data and start like screwing around with it and asking questions about it. Like now we have this new terminology called like GTM engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And like GTM engineer has become like quite like fashionable. And I think it's a good thing. Like I think it makes a ton of sense. But like, what was GTM engineer before Clay decided to like make a name for it? Well, that was a data engineer. And like building internal tools around data that comes from Salesforce and like building a data product for that, well, that was just the charter of the data team. And so obviously, you've got this like interesting like transition of like just engineers are doing this. And then like we have like specific like data engineers that are dedicated to this kind of stuff. And then now there's a GTM engineer. And now you're starting to hear AI engineers are starting to become like responsible for doing this work. Again, this is great. This makes a lot of sense. I think it's exciting, but it is interesting. It's like a lot of the same work, just new tools. Like what are the tools that kind of like enable this? And so right now, I think that's the trend that I'm seeing in terms of like who's doing this work.
Wow, this is fascinating because you've seen this kind of zero to like a proper data system movie a couple of times, right? And it's like in various different contexts. But if you had to kind of rebuild one piece of the entire stack from scratch, well, what would that be?
Okay, so I'll say a couple things. Like if you had asked me this maybe 3 years ago, I wouldn't have paused. I would have said the query engine. Like I would have just like blurted out the query engine. And the reason is because like, where do you do your queries? When I was at Weights and Biases, we were a BigQuery customer. Have you ever used a BigQuery like UI?
Yeah.
It feels like someone like designed it to punish me.
Yes.
I don't know how, when we met, I don't know what crime I committed in front of them, but they were like, I'm going to make it my job to make Bryan sad. And then like, I feel like the Snowflake version, they're like, oh, that's cute. Like, are we playing a game? It's like those JavaScript competitions, like who can design the most painful calendar like UI. I feel like the Snowflake team was like, oh, we're competing for worst like query engine. We got you. Like, hold our database query.
Just hold our beer.
Yeah, and I'm like, so those are just like offenses on the world. What's interesting is before I was a BigQuery customer, I was at Stitch Fix, and at Stitch Fix we use Data Grip connected to Presto. And I remember thinking like, man, like Presto is such a nightmare to get like working well, but thank God for our algorithms engineering team. Like, our platform team has made this like work, and now I can use Data Grip, and Data Grip is like kind of okay. It's not the most amazing thing in the world. It's just like kind of okay. So if you had asked me 3 years ago this question, I'm like, the query engine, they suck. It's like, like so painful. But now I have two things, and both of these things are like, they're somewhere in the camp of like incredible to like, it's still hard for me to believe. And those two things are Hex and MotherDuck. And they're really, really incredible in kind of almost orthogonal directions. And it's just a little bit surprising to me. If you had asked me 3 years ago, does this need to be one thing or two things? I would have said, like, I don't even know what the two would be. I was wrong. Like MotherDuck, I'm like exploring the data with SQL in a way that feels like so fast it boggles the mind. I don't understand how they make it so fast. And like just doing quick things in MotherDuck, I'm like, holy shit, this is so great. On the flip side, when I have this kind of like building up a really complicated like data pool, and there's other things that Hex is good for, but like when I'm trying to build up a really complicated data pool, this like I write a SQL query, I get a data frame. I write another SQL query on that data frame. It compiles that into a single query, and I didn't have to think about it. Holy shit. So like that is like amazing. That's actually one of the reasons why I started getting like interested in Hex even before I worked there. So those two things have like solved that question. And then of course now you layer on AI and things get really exciting.
Don't forget the dynamic variables of Hex. That was like for me one of the best things of like, okay, I don't need to figure out how to load this. I'm just going to write this little query, got my data frame, I'll do my pandas. Great, I can make this dynamic, make this an app, and now boom, it's gone. My RevOps guy is happy.
Certainly.
Such a big unlock.
There's a lot to love about Hex, I think. But even at this like simplest layer of like the query engine, I'm like, man, like that was the thing that was really like making me sad as a data scientist. I just remember constantly commenting out some lines of SQL, rerunning it. Fuck. If I comment these lines out, I have to change this other part of the SQL statement. Okay, I like run the, okay, like so annoying. And like, honestly, in Hex, I never had to do that. And that was like magical. And similarly for some of the like very rapid heuristics from MotherDuck, I'm just like, oh my God, it's so good. So that's what my answer used to be. I know this is a long preamble. I think today, I don't really have a good way to chart easily. Like I want to make charts. I want them to be like according to my style, like in branding. I want them to be in a very particular form. I want them to be print worthy. I want basically unlimited flexibility. I don't want to drag and drop anything. And so like, I just built my own library for this because I was so frustrated. Nothing is very good in this space. The chart builder in Omni for certain kinds of things for dashboarding, great. The chart builder in Hex for other things, also really, really great. I still think in Hex charts a fair bit, but when it comes time to like, I want to make a chart for my blog, there's nothing. And so I built my own. And so now I can write natural language. I can give it a data set and I can get a chart that matches the theory branding and kind of like uses the correct fonts and the right line widths and sort of the right color palette. And I can do anything I want.
Yeah.
Like if I want to commit some chart crimes,
Yeah.
I can do that. Recently, I had to make this like
no pie charts.
No. I mean, that's the let's. Geez, I'm not a sociopath.
That was the worst chart crime I can think of.
Yeah, recently I wanted to make this like step leaderboard chart. It's like a dotted line chart where it steps because you want to see like progress over time. But I had to do like 10 of them on the same chart. It's like chart junk to put them all on top of one another. And I was like, well, I know the rule, never use more than like 10 small multiples. Oh, well, so I 10 small multiples. And like, I just, like, how did I make it not look like shit? Well, I don't know. You can judge if it looks like shit, but I just like abused my chart library to make it look right. And so I think these are the things that like right now, I still feel like this is really tedious. I think another thing is like, we have gotten to a world where there are more agents for data than there are like flavors of SQL, which is saying something. And yet, I still don't feel like there's like a data agent that really fits into my workflow organically. I recently hosted this like hackathon because there's not something that allows me to look at like data spread across multiple modalities and still kind of like allow me to do data work. I can do this data work with Cursor, but it's really painful for certain reasons. And so one of my like motivations for building this ridiculous data set is like, I have a lot of tasks where I'm like, here's a bunch of PDFs, here's a bunch of log files, here's some structured data. Let me just like do great data work on top of this. And right now I claim, and I've yet to be proven wrong, there's nothing great for this. And so that's something that like I'm really eager to see. So that was why I built the data set that I built.
Yeah, that hackathon was amazing.
Thanks. For people that maybe don't know, I hosted a hackathon about a month ago where I constructed a data set of that type and then 65 questions about the data. And they're all hard, real data science questions that like, as I've joked a couple times, they were inspired by painful questions I've gotten over the years and have ruined my Friday. And so like, I tried to kind of harness all that pain into the questions for this data set.
Yeah. When you're talking though about rebuilding the stack, I was hearing two different things. It's like the visualization, so kind of the data story, part of the data story and element, and then just being able to work functionally across like mixed sets of data comfortably without having to code it all out to actually structure it in a way.
Totally.
So I'm a Plotly fangirl. So I'm curious about, because Plotly, you can do the layouts.
Totally.
What was wrong with Plotly for your needs?
Okay, so Plotly, I used Plotly pretty heavily for about a year. When I was at Blue Bottle, I was like using Plotly in a cafe one time, not one of our cafes, like a different cafe. And I like look over and the person next to me is also using Plotly. And I was like, oh, that's cute. And then I'm like, that's interesting. He's not using Plotly. He's building Plotly. And I was just like, are you an employee of Plotly? And he was like, yes. And I was like, so amazing. I was like, I was just making a Plotly. Anyway, long story short, I think Plotly got a lot of things right. And again, in the age of LLMs, I think Plotly is like a different, like it's different. Plotly's API has always been like, again, adversarial, similar to the like query engines, where I'm sort of like, oh, I wonder like why they don't like data scientists and why they want us to suffer. And so like, I've always found that the Plotly, despite having a lot of capabilities I always found the APIs to be like baffling. Like I could just never guess how they behaved. Also, I would experiment. I would ask yourself like, how many times have you sacrificed your creativity and your inspiration because of the tool that you're using? And I claim, I do this all the time. Like every time I use a piece of software, I'm making sacrifices of my creativity. But in charting in particular,
I've created fake charts in Figma. And like I've used shapes to create fake charts because I couldn't really get what I wanted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I feel like more acutely than almost any other type of work that I've ever done, that's been the area where I'm like, I can't get what's in my brain into this API. And what I would say is like having just built a charting library internally, again, just basically for myself, maybe like one other user, like, wow, you could do a shitload of stuff with Matplotlib if you let Cursor go wild. I mean, I made some charts that like I've wanted to make in the past. Like, let me give you an example. When I went to Weights and Biases, we built this flux chart. And in case the audience is not familiar, a flux chart is you have a time period on the x-axis. And so let's say it's a weekly flux chart or a monthly flux chart. Every tick is a time period. And on the y-axis, you have a stacked bar chart that can go up and down. Above the y-axis is good stuff. So this is number of new users. This is number of users that we previously thought were churned that have come back. That's called resurrected. And number of retained users. So users that we had before that have continued to be active. What's below the y-axis? Customers that you've churned, or in some cases, you can put some other things down there. Building a flux chart is extremely laborious in most languages or like charting stuff. It's really hard in Hex, maybe still impossible. At one point, I think I was able to really hack and get one to work, but it's really close to impossible if it's not impossible. Nick Cruchin can yell at me later if I'm wrong. He's the charts guru in Hex. In Mode, this was like a Sisyphean task. I think I eventually got something close. Surprisingly, I was able to get this to work in I got this to work in Mixpanel. That was like not totally a disaster. But anyway, this chart type, huge pain in the ass. But you can get it working and it's really valuable. What's even more valuable is to be able to take an extract from that flux chart and make it a stacked bar chart on the same axis down below. Small multiples where you have like a small version of certain things that you want to track and the top one be that. You know what's even more nice? Adding annotations. You know what's even more nice? Being able to add a different coloring to a subset of the time domain, and within that time domain, different slices of the stacked chart. Dear reader, what if I told you could also change the background color of the axis so that you can see which quarter is which?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to stop there. The sky is your limit. When you were working with something like Cursor, this chart can get more and more and more rich.
Yeah.
I find myself thinking like, I can open Tufte's book and say, no longer is this reserved for artists. Now I too can make data visualizations that actually like harness all the information that I want. For one of our quarterly, like our QBR recently, I made this chart that I'm talking about, not with like customers, but with a different data set underlying it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, A, there's no way in hell I could do this in any library. B, the amount of time that this would have taken to even get close, insane. And I only spent about 3 hours making this chart. And it's everything I want. It's perfect. It's in our fonts. It's in our colors. It uses the right like line style. I'm able to go as crazy and hog wild as I want. Oh, the annotation looks kind of weird. Move it over a little bit. Make the arrow more wiggly. Who the fuck cares? Like, like Cursor is just like, yes, sir. Like, and so I think this is my point. Like, I think we often find ourselves thinking that tools are good, but I have become much more ambitious in a lot of my work because I'm now like exposed to this like superpower.
We're like self-limiting in ways we don't even know.
Exactly.
Because like for people that are listening, 3 hours to make a chart like Bryan's talking about is not that much. Like, I'm sure you're like, what do you mean? 3 hours on a chart is like mind-blowing. To do what he's done right now, the fact that you couldn't do it, but if you were going to try it, you'd have to restructure your data in a bunch of weird fucking ways. You would probably give up at a certain point and just start doing what I was doing, either working with shapes or somehow making it transparent to try and get different like hidden things instead of actually having it. And then annotations, most of the time I would always just give up if it's in a deck and I would just create like, here's a text box. I'll just make it look like the right color, like everything.
Totally.
And that was just very time consuming. So just try to give a little, flush it out for people that have not felt this struggle.
You call it something that is like really underappreciated about chart libraries that are good. Chart libraries that are good allow you to do things like aggregations and allow you to do things like mixed type, like underlying data. Because ultimately, you come to the chart library with your data in a normal form. It's in some structure that it should be in.
Mm-hmm.
And then you are often, like in the Tableau days, I used to then sort of like pull out my jackhammer and be like, okay, I'm going to now beat the shit out of this data to get into the exact form that it needs to be in.
Yep.
So that Tableau will allow me to make this chart type. Some of the modern like BI tools like, Hex and Omni, they are pretty good about saying like, okay, we'll let you do like aggregations in the charting library and make this kind of easy and powerful. That's great. I'm really excited about that like trend. But let me tell you, Cursor will do anything for you. Like, you want to aggregate in this like completely bizarre way to support 2 chart types simultaneously? Okay, who cares? Like, it doesn't have any qualms about this. Like, and so that's where I'm just like, yeah, my mind has really been transformed. And this is just a teeny tiny little effort. I mean, I spent 2 days in this library. This is not like, oh, the last like 3/4 of like engineering time. That was like 2 days of, I was trying to write the blog post about America's Next Top Modeler. I was pissed off that my charts looked like shit. And I was like, all right, let's go. So yeah, now I can turn anything into a theory chart. So
Wow. Well, we'll definitely need to link to the charts you created. I have my fair share about working with charting library, and then listening through what you talked about, it almost feel like that previously the charting library needed to create an abstraction, but it's like limiting like what we wanted to do. But now, like with all this AI agent or coding agent, that it almost like we would just need a bare minimum abstraction, like maybe D3 or something that it's kind of very primitive, that you can kind of just customize everything, right? And then with natural language, it's like, okay, now translate that to that representation of transformation and like charting that we needed.
yeah, I started off by just telling Cursor like, hey, I want to build a charting library that is mostly built on top of Matplotlib, and it takes YAML. And I want to be able to specify in YAML like roughly what the chart information is. And then using that YAML, I want you to translate to different chart types. We're going to need to build, and this is what I'm talking to Cursor, I'm like, we're going to need to build sort of like a translation from the YAML to a bunch of different like Matplotlib functions, like build out like a simple skeleton. Here's an example plot that I want to be able to build. And so like, that's where I start. And then it's not even that I want to go and define the YAML by hand, not manual YAML, if you want to be rhyming. What it is I'm actually going to make the agent do the YAML too. But the agent is just like when it has all the structure, it's surprisingly good at just like grinding this out. And like, because it's YAML, it's easy for me to change things.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, oh, like I want to change the chart title. I just like go and do that. I don't have to look anywhere. It's like in a spec. Like, it's so fast now for me to take a chart, make a new one with different data, changing a couple of things, or just tell the agent, hey, make me a new YAML. This is the thing that I want. Oh, we don't support that chart type. We do now. Get to work. And like, and so like, that's what I'm saying. Like this crazy flux chart that I made, technically now that's a supported chart type in my library. I don't know how many times I'm going to need this like crazy chart type, but like I got it. And it's like, and at one point I'm like, you know what? Let's just like leave off the bottom part. I want to see what it looks like without the bottom part. I just like remove part of the YAML. Okay. It's like all so trivial. And so it's just very straightforward to build very ergonomic DSLs that are ergonomic for me and for Cursor Agent later on.
Yeah. Something's interesting, again, from you is we had an earlier conversation where I think it was with, was it with Roger, where he was talking about using AI agents to help you create deterministic processes, right? So instead of just letting it go wild, which is like what you're talking about, it's like I've made you, here's the YAML, you will make this deterministic and then work, versus just letting it totally have free reign.
Absolutely.
Like forcing you to create structure and then work in the structure.
Absolutely. Right now, we're doing migration is a little bit of an oversimplification, but for sake of argument, we'll call it migration internally. We've got a ton of unstructured data, and the thing that generated this unstructured data has gone through multiple evolutions. There was the period before I got here. There was the period shortly after I got here. There was the period a little bit later after I got here. And there was the most recent version where we went and enhanced the data generating process. All of those were like non-trivial time periods. They're everything from like a year and a half to like a month. So all of that data is important. But the structure that comes out of it is wildly unevenly distributed. The most recent version is much more structured, predictably. Like I was trying to make it structured and good. Some of the previous ones were the right shape at the right time, but looking back, we're like, okay, so why am I telling you this? Because right now we are migrating all this data into a new backend. And the back end, we want to be structured. There's some specific reasons why, but one of the reasons is we want to be able to search this data. Another reason is because we want to build another data product on top of this. And by having the structured version of this, the data product that we can build will be a lot more useful.
Yeah.
But remember what I just said. The most recent version has a great structure that we planned. The previous version is like semi-structured. The previous version before that, it has a structure. And the previous before that, like no one's calling that structured. It's just like notes in the doc.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay because I can basically like point an LLM as a map reduce over all of these documents and say, extract this. If you see this exact structure, just use your regex engine. If you see this weird structure, use your regex section on these parts and use, your LLM brain on these parts.
Mhm.
If you don't see any structure, have fun, do your best, like extract what you can. And so what's crazy is it's not even like I use an LLM to like crunch a bunch of unstructured data into a structured form. Nope. I'm literally using an LLM to do several different types of things simultaneously. And on the parts that are structured, I'm doing structured shit. On the parts that aren't, I'm not. And I'm even getting visibility into like exactly what's happening where. I use the MapReduce terminology, not because like it is a true MapReduce, but like it is very kind of similar paradigm where some things I'm just like mapping to the next like stage.
Mhm.
And then in some cases I need to kind of reduce and I even do some splitting. And so like as I talked about, there are some of those formats where it's like, it's like semi-structured. We're going to like send that off to just like this piece and this other one we're going to process with LLMs and then we're going to reduce them later on. This kind of DAG or this like workflow like builder, where does this exist?
Yeah.
It doesn't, but you can build it in a day.
Awesome. That's cool.
Yeah, I think we are like witnessing this new birth of a new paradigm where it's like almost like personal software, right? But it's like deterministic when it should be, right? And then
Yes.
like heavy lifting where do random stuff like to some extent of your confidence of the LLM, if you will, and then just like go.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it's certainly not the case that I'm just like, just YOLO, like have fun. Like I'm building evals for the pieces of that are LLM generated. I'm even building evals for the part of the code that it's going to use in this deterministic way. Like I am supervising it pretty carefully, but it is definitely one of those things that's like, I very much don't know 5 years ago, like how I would have achieved this goal. Like I don't really see like a clear path 5 years ago to doing this kind of task. It's so mixed in terms of like the input data.
Thank you for sharing. What is one principle you wish every data team lived by?
I think truth seeking is like the number one for me. We have this assumption in the industry that like everyone is truth seeking, but occasionally I'll bump into like even people in data, like I come from math. Okay. In math, like there is nothing else. There is only truth seeking.
Yeah.
Like that is our like coda. And then like
literally, where's the proof? Where's the proof?
Yeah, exactly.
And where's my proof for the proof?
Right. And so like entering data, I'm kind of like, oh, these are like people that like care about data a lot. Like they're also very truth seeking. And for the most part, I think I've been happily surprised at like how truth seeking people tend to be. But I will say, and it's a little unfair to lever this against data teams because again, it's mostly been good. But there are people that are like data team adjacent that are not truth seeking. And that has been my biggest disappointment in industry, period, is the level to which people are seeking other ends and priorities. Like people will openly talk about like telling a great data story to like make people happy or telling the data story that gets you into the decision. And I'm like, no, like we don't have to do that. Like data storytelling, great. Like I love to tell stories with data. But the data storytelling, like it doesn't need to be synonymous with telling people what they want to hear to get yourself a promotion. Like if you have a successful career built on glazing people, like I kind of hate you. That's like actually like almost enough for me to like classify you into like bite me. And like what's shocking is people will say without like cracking a smile, like, oh yeah, like a big part of like being a successful data scientist is like telling the stories that are like important that people want to hear and like make the org a success. And I'm like, I don't think that that has to be in contrast to truth seekingness. I think candidly, there's been a big divorce in the industry between folks wanting data teams to do work for them, to tell them what they want to hear, but not realizing that like signing up for working with a data team means sometimes getting told things you don't want to hear. And there's a surprising like conflict here. And, we've seen the sort of like boom and bust of like data science. You hear, unfortunately, like once a month now, someone's like, data science is dead. And I think that's absurd. But like, it is interesting. Like, I think the reason we've seen this boom and bust cycle is I think it sounded exciting to executives to be able to say, like, I've got a data team and I operate as like a data-driven organization. And then they're like, oh God, like the data isn't what I thought it was going to be.
Yep.
Huh. Like, let me give you a positive example in this category. When I was at Blue Bottle, we had this disagreement amongst two folks in leadership. One person was like, if you come into a cafe and you see very few of a pastry, that's going to make you more excited to buy that pastry. And the other executive was like, no way. If you come into a cafe and you only see one of this pastry, you're going to think it's like the bottom of the barrel. You're not going to want that pastry. And these two executives, and these are the top executives at Blue Bottle, they disagreed. And I was like, we could probably design an experiment to test this. And they were like, that would be great. And it was hard. It was really difficult to design an experiment to test this. I mentioned it earlier, but I did. And we ran this experiment and we ran it in like a controlled way. Like I had a statistician on my team at the time. We like went back to the literature of like, how could you design a real life experiment in this way? And we designed an experiment and we tested that hypothesis. And I remember the one that was wrong, and it was a little bit like nuanced in terms of like who was wrong. The one that was wrong was like, that's so interesting. I'm really glad that we ran this experiment. And I just remember thinking like, now that's data driven. And so later on, when like an executive would be like, oh, like we've been running this playbook and I believe in this playbook. And I come back and I'm like, that's not working. Like, here's all the data that says it's not working.
Yep.
And then they throw an absolute like conniption fit, and they like their entire like identity becomes like trying to go and find errors in the data analysis. Like, I think that's been the contrast that I've seen. And I've been really fortunate. I've gotten to work at places like Blue Bottle and Stitch Fix where like the culture is really deep truth seeking. And you've probably heard before that Katrina Lake is kind of famous for being like, well, if the data says that like this is what we should do, we should probably give it a try. And that's what I experienced at Stitch Fix, is like this like really deep belief in like a data culture. And even that first startup that I joined, it was acquired by IBM, like Michelle, the CEO, I still remember like we had this technology that was selling very well. And I still remember like I got some data that was like, I actually don't think that this is like as good as we've advertised. And she's just like, really? And she like called the head of marketing like in the meeting. And she's like, we need to adjust the website. We're overselling like how good this is. Until Bryan can figure out like what's going on, we need to fix this. Like, again, I'm right out of math grad school. I'm like, yeah, that sounds really appropriate. Only now, 15 years later, am I like, what a weirdo, So like, it's great. It's great that like I've gotten some opportunities to work with like really, really like truth seeking individuals. And so that's the thing that like, I wish it was more evenly distributed. I wish every data team, and again, it's mostly not the data team itself, but there are some, I would say like clout seeking individuals that will go after whatever it takes.
I think it's not even clout, because I think it's when I'm thinking about, I worked with a bunch of different PMs in my career. Like, you don't have anyone telling you numbers. So you just get to go off vibes in user interviews. And then once you get numbers in there, because you're like the first hire, you're telling a lot of people a lot of uncomfortable truths. Like kind of the dark side of like, I think the data role, especially on like when you're working with product, is you're telling people a lot of like what doesn't work, which people don't like because they haven't had that. And so I'm curious about how you've helped build that trust. Because like sometimes it's like been a barrier for me getting data ingested somewhere usable for me. Because they know once the data is somewhere, they're going to have to start being accountable in ways they hadn't necessarily been accountable before.
Totally. It's definitely hard. It's interesting that you brought up PMs, especially because I've been very fortunate. I've gotten to work with some really amazing PMs over the years. And there's almost a direct correspondence between the PMs that I'm thinking of when I say some amazing PMs and the ones that were like, oh, this isn't working? Oh, that's super interesting. I wonder how we could fix it.
Yeah.
Versus the ones that are like, no, I think you're probably measuring it wrong.
Yeah.
Data versus ego.
Yeah. And I think ultimately that's what a lot of this comes down to is like, to what degree does the person believe that they have some unique instinct that is more powerful than the natural experiment, which is our world? To your question about like, how do you get better at this? I think some people would say that I've not gotten better at this. My personal reflection on this is like, people know that I don't take myself very seriously. And so I tend to have success with like approaching it with a lot of like willingness to dive in as a follow-up. And so like, I never sort of say like, this is the end of the story. I'm always like, okay, like where do you think that there might be more to the story? And so I think inviting that in has been like more effective than I'm pretty sure this is the right answer. Stop doing what you're doing. But it is tough. And, you know, Ciel said the word ego, and that's ultimately a big part of this is just like how much curiosity is on the other side of this relationship. I think, you know, curiosity is one of the most valuable assets as a data person you can possibly have. Curiosity means that when they are conflicted about your results, you are curious as to why.
Yeah.
Like saying you are wrong is not curious. Saying, why are your priors different than what the data is showing is curious. And so I think trying to bring that level of curiosity to everything is aspirationally like the way that you succeed here. But ultimately, like there will always be like hurdles here, and egos are a big part of it. And people want to get promoted and people want to be thought of as like really, really smart. And for whatever reason, some people think that being wrong is not compatible with being smart. And I think that's a bummer.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess one last question before we go into our lightning round. So we talk about a lot of the space and how AI is like reshaping thing, and then all this data culture or data leadership. And I think you're always in the forefront of all those, right? And then what is the hype trend that you think will derail in the next 3 years?
Okay, so if I'm specifically thinking about things that I think are not going to be as like effective as people have hyped them up to be, I think self-serve data analytics.
Yes. I can get behind this. I can 100% get behind this. Yes.
Oh man, I've like believed in the promise. I've made the promise. I've tried to build the thing that like delivers the promise. I've signed up for the promise. I continue to be disappointed. You know, I wrote that blog post, The Hunt for a Trustworthy Data Agent. The reason I called it what I called it is because for me, like I ran that as an experiment. I didn't build the hackathon because I was like, oh, like I want to show people why they're wrong. And I didn't build it as I think this is already here. It was an experiment. I was like, okay, let's run an experiment. Let's see where we really are. And the number one thing that I came away from that thinking is we are nowhere close to self-serve. We aren't even on the same like outer rim of a galaxy. It is crazy how far we are from self-serve data analytics. And I don't want to like talk too much of my own like book here, but like trustworthy data agents is a thing that like, you know, coming back to this like truth seeking, like that's the point. Like we're trying to get to real answers for things. If all we want to do is give answers, then yes, you can ask the sycophantic data scientist who's ready for the next promotion, how's our growth looking this month? It's looking great, buddy. Like, yeah, you could do that. And similarly, you can ask a cursor agent, how's my growth? And I'm sure it'll tell you. If you just want answers, maybe it'll give you answers, but trustworthy answers, I don't see anywhere close. We're not even close on like the analytics questions of like what's happening. If you can't tell me what's happening, then you can't tell me how it's happening. If you can't tell me how it's happening, you sure as hell can't tell me why it's happening.
Yep.
And so like, people were selling third base, like sliding into home. And I'm like, that's cool because I'm still on first base. I have yet to see anything on first base. And so I don't know. That's my very self-disappointed answer is I think we're nowhere close to self-serve.
I do not have as much experience as you, but I've absolutely come to believe, and I used to be on the self-serve, like let's give to everyone, let's have them empowered. And I'm curious, I've come much more on curation, on like how can I give people curated, not necessarily opinionated, like they should be making their own opinions, but like curated data that can help answer their questions and more importantly, help them ask the right questions. Because I think that's the other thing about self-serve that you didn't necessarily touch on, but I see is like, we're not even asking the right questions. Like that's been a good chunk of my job is getting people to even ask the right question.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something to like, what is the right question? Because like, coming back to like, why was there a boom in like data science? Well, the sort of like allure is like, we're going to ask great questions, which yield great answers to change our operational behavior. People didn't want to ask like, how are our growth numbers? Because they're like interested in like a particular number. Like no one cares about the number on the screen. What they care about is, should we change our behavior?
Yeah.
The problem is the things that you need to ask to change your behavior are not, what is our sales number? It's not how many dollars of pipeline do we have? That doesn't change behavior. What changes behavior is the follow-up question. Okay, our pipeline is not as good as we'd like it to be. Like, where are we missing on pipe? Okay, we're missing on pipe in mid-market. Okay, so like we're missing in mid-market. Any particular reasons why? Okay, well, bookings are way down. Okay, well, why are bookings way down? And like none of these questions, like it's all about like what operation can we change or what action can we take? And those require sort of like a lot of questions. What's exciting about LLMs and in the sort of self-serve story is they're tireless. Like you could just like pepper them with questions all day. What's nuanced is LLMs are successful at answering data questions in a very like curated garden, to use your word curated, but this stuff gets out of the distribution instantly. Coming back to the sort of like relationship between data teams and others, like the most common thing that I've ever experienced with great leaders that are data driven is that I can't answer their question. There's like a weird like relationship where like the ones that are good, the really amazing leaders from a data perspective, are the ones that ask me so many damn follow-ups that they eventually get to the limit of my knowledge. They exhaust not just my patience, but my knowledge. Usually when they're asking a lot of questions, I'm not like, oh, I'm so tired of asking. No, it's shit. Actually, I looked at 80 things and that's a really great perspective I've never seen. I worked with one executive, Yonda, who like, I felt like no matter how prepared I came, there would be a moment where he would ask me something. I'm like, yeah, that is a really interesting way that we should look at this. And that is ultimately probably the way that we could take action on this. I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
And so like, what's exciting is like, that's inexhaustible for LLMs. What's scary is like, we're nowhere near where they can do that kind of like iterative work that they can kind of like put the signals together. Again, to come back to the answer data set. Why did I build a data set that has like multiple modalities? It's because in my experience, not everything is in the SQL warehouse. Like the answers to these questions is not in like Snowflake. The answers to these questions is some combination of like your dumbass like document store combined with some logs that you don't know how to get and you have to ask an engineer for, and some untransformed data that's like technically got the answer, but it certainly is not in the table. And so that's why I made this hellish data set that I made, because like, I don't know, that's what I care about.
Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome and exciting. So Thank you so much, Bryan. And then so before we wrap, we're going to put you in our data debug round, quick fire questions, short answers. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. First programming language that you love or hate it.
Small talk. I'm going to get canceled for that.
Okay.
That was on the love side, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Your go-to data set for when you use for testing.
Cars.
Oh, what car data set?
There's a famous cars data set. It's like it's a bunch of features about like, like how big's the engine, what's the gas mileage.
Oh, okay.
It's got enough variability in many of the features that it like I can show my students kind of like how different things break, and I can explain why you need things like normalization and stuff like that.
If I remember correctly, our studio just had it.
Yeah.
Like preloaded.
Yeah. A lot of
it would just be there. That's why I was like, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. It was just there.
Yeah. It's like way better than wine, but it's like kind of similar to wine. And then I find it more useful than housing. And obviously like Penguins is tiny.
Okay. What's one lesson outside of tech that influenced how you build?
I'm going to come back to this curiosity and questions thing.
Mhm.
I learned from a feedback class that I took that like feedback is a question. It's not a statement. And by thinking about that and by finally coming to grips with that and learning how to like use that, I started applying it to other things. I started asking like, what if I could pursue everything via a question? What if like everything I choose to do, I choose to like speak in questions as opposed to statements?
Mm.
And like, that is surprisingly effective as like a manager, but it's also surprisingly effective as like a builder.
What's one hot take about data you're willing to defend on a podcast?
We are in the age of unstructured data and people are not using it enough.
What's your favorite podcast or book that's not about data or tech?
I read a lot of nonfiction. I really like the book Mosquito. It's good. It's about the history of civilization through the eyes of like mosquito.
Wow, that's definitely interesting. Well, thank you so much, Bryan. One last thing is where can listeners find you? And then like, what do you want people to do more?
Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find on both LinkedIn and Twitter. And I now even have a Substack. So on Twitter, I'm at BE Bischof. And on LinkedIn, I'm just Bryan Bischof. And then my Substack is called Pseudo Random Generator. And what I like people to do more is ask questions.
Love that. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been an absolute treat and pleasure. Really enjoyed this conversation.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. That's all we have time for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on datarenegades.com. Data Renegades is brought to you by Heavybit, the leading investor in enterprise infrastructure. For more information, visit heavybit.com.